Hello everyone. This is Daniel Gimario again with our monthly video blog, and I am joined here today by Elise Hebert, who has been involved in the school for quite some time, and this is one of the subjects that actually over the years we've most talked about and inquired into. And so I thought she was the perfect person in order to be able to do this particular exploration this month. This is actually, you're going to be seeing this around the time of the new moon. And so that's the time period on this that we're doing this, which is near the end of September of 2022. So we are going to be discussing in some depth, starting out with an inquiry into sex and gender, but then also, for the most part, going into different approaches to intimacy, and what do we mean by intimacy, and how can the different expressions of the human journey be most valued and honored in a personal relationship. So why not put up the our title slide.
Okay.
And we can discuss some more about what our intention is here.
Sure.
The full spectrum of the archetypal masculine and the archetypal feminine in intimacy, sexuality, and relationships. And this is a subject that certainly cannot be handled adequately or comprehensively in about an hour. So this is just to really introduce the subject. I will mention that in the first few moments, what I'm going to recapitulate as a starting point of our inquiry is some work that I've been involved in for a good number of years, actually all the way back to the late 70s, regarding the issues of sexuality, sex, gender, and these are very these are topics that a lot of people are talking about these days, and a little bit of background on that is necessary before we dive into the full spectrum. But let me just mention, for those that are actually deeply interested in a deeper dive into this, I want to suggest three things. And there will be information on these things in the resources that will go out together with this video blog. One is another video blog I did over a year ago with Mary on sex and gender. Also an entire seminar from 2021 that we did on this issue, on this subject. But then also we have an entire course in our school, which is a course on relationship and the inner sacred marriage process, and that's part of our certification curriculum. So there's other resources if you want to go more deeply into the overview work that I'm going to present here. So let me just say just a few things about this, in terms of my own involvement with this subject. I came out of the astrological renaissance that was happening in the late 60s, early 70s. And during that particular time period, there were so many different new ways of thinking about so much. There was gay liberation, there was the women's movement, but there was also we could call it an attack, I guess, a re-evaluation of mainstream traditional astrology, where so there's the recognition, number one, that there wasn't enough feminine imagery in it, so then along came the asteroid goddesses and the work with myth and symbol, and all through the 70s, that was a major point of my own research. But regarding this subject, by the mid 70s, it was very clear that liberation would come, or the ability to experience the full spectrum, or to at least value the full spectrum, required moving beyond the cultural definitions of what a man is or what a woman is. And so during that time period, it was pretty clear that the patriarchal stranglehold of male and female imagery was a great problem. So a lot of the astrology that was happening in that Renaissance time was to expand the view of this. Now, parallel to this time period had to do with the word gender. Now, up until the 60s, pretty much the only use of the word gender was with grammar. It had never been applied to sex, as far as, you know, men and women. It was like different words would have a masculine or feminine tense to it or whatever. I mean, so there would be gender. The thing that's very interesting about English is that it didn't happen in English. So there's a lot of defects in English, but English language, but that's not one of them. You know, so you basically have in the German language, you have the sun is feminine and the moon is masculine. Same thing in Japan. While in Romance languages, it's the one most people think of. You know, the sun is masculine and the moon is feminine. These are just some of the challenges when one was using the word gender. But then during the 70s and 80s, and it kind of went back and forth. There were certain feminist writers that started to interchangeably use the words sex and gender. And what has happened recently is that now, in many cases, and particularly in academia, sex is a verboten word. It's not even used, you know, so everything is just gender. So as far as I'm concerned, gender is a hijacked word based upon how it had originally been understood. Now, this is a reflection in our paradigm, where our view in this paradigm is that, first and foremost, we're all human beings. Maybe not human beings that are already AI, but I mean, organic human beings, 300 years of history of Homo sapien is that we're all humans first. And then what happens is 99.99.5% of humans are either XX chromosome or XY chromosome. So we do live, we can make a case for this, you know, cosmology, philosophically, going back into the history of human beings back 300 years. We come into this world, which is a binary world. There is yin and yang. There is archetypal masculine and feminine. And these are not the same as whether you're born in a particular cultural role as a man or a woman. So there's a biological reality. Now, there are some human beings that are born with both. And there is also the situation that happens with the increased use of hormones and electronic stimulation of the media. There tends to be a few more percentages of people born that are both. Now, that's a whole deeper subject that I go into in some of the other resources that I'm bringing up. But for the sake of this inquiry, just so you know where this is coming from, we do first recognize through Venus and Mars, a woman's Venus, biological female Venus for a woman, biological male Mars for a man, represent different possible expressions of being man or woman. So they could be thought of as the gender expressions. And so just so you know what the foundation of this work is. Does that make any sense? Anything you want to bring up regarding what I'm
No, yeah, that's making good sense. And maybe you might mention for same-sex couples, how would that work when you're looking at relationship and different gender expressions?
Well, that's actually the purpose of everything else we're going to talk about here today. So we'll be looking at the great variety of relational choices, great different ways of being men and women that are not bound into what 1950s patriarchal culture thought men and women were supposed to be. but also not what the Hellenistic culture thought they were supposed to be. I mean, my goodness, if we use the Hellenistic definitions, people forget that during the 300 years of Greek history, women didn't even have names. It was so patriarchal, you know, so we cannot just go, it's no wonder the traditional astrology, it was almost all entirely a masculine orientation. So we don't want to be locked into any particular time frame in history. We want to come up with a more global expression. So what you're going to see in our investigation here is just one possible way of looking at the different gender expressions for men and women, but clearly it's still that same revolutionary fervor that we had in the 70s, which is to move beyond what the culture said men and women were supposed to be. So it's even today, I can have great compassion for the confusions about this and how the younger generation does not want to be even binary, you know, does not even want to, because they think that that's about what the culture says men and women are supposed to be. So there's a desire for freedom regarding all of this, and I greatly support that. When it comes to couples or, you know, relationship possibilities, I never mentioned this to you, Elise, but back in the early 70s, there was a book that came out, and apparently it's out of print. I haven't been able to see it anywhere. The book was called Options, and the book had to do with every possible way human beings have tried to do relationship and sexuality. So it listed like all, you know, pair bonding to group marriage to polyamory to you know, sexual but not any sex, it doesn't matter, you know, and every other everything you can imagine. And at the end of the book, their conclusion was nothing works. Now, of course, that's a way of saying there's not just one way. You know, and so that's the interesting thing about human beings. Human beings really have choices. You know, we even have choices. There's no one right diet. You know, we just happen to have a stomach that's halfway in between being a carnivore and a cow, you know, that must have vegetables, right? You know, so we can go many different directions. So there's not just one way. The same thing is true for, you know, sex and relationship. There's not just one way. There are all these different options. So to say that nothing works was simply a way of saying there's not just one way that everybody should be following, right? So is that what you were questioning about here?
Yeah, I think just, you know, because sometimes people ask about that when I'm talking about it, you know, how does this work for same-sex couples? And
right. Oh, okay. On that particular issue,
yeah,
what we're going to be describing here with the different genders, the 24 different genders with the Venus and Mars positions, it applies archetypally whatever your sexual preference is. So I've had the opportunity over the years of doing actually hundreds of sessions for gay and lesbian people and couples, and it really is not any different as far as the archetypal projections and expressions. So this applies across the board for when it comes to different relationship intentions.
mm-hmm. Good to know.
So why don't we go to the next slides and begin to dive into the core material of our inquiry.
Okay. So did we want to touch on these or go to this one first?
That one first, right. So one of the ways that historically many different cultures, but certainly the one that is most is represented by the words yin and yang is China. But this is the same kind of thing is woven into Hellenistic and the Ptolemaic astrological system, where they would basically determine certain signs or certain planets as being either more yin or more yang. And I approach this from a archetypal perspective. And in other words, when we're talking about archetypal masculine and feminine, we're not talking about, does that mean a man, does that mean a woman, right? So here we have this particular sort of gradient where you have on the far left maximum yang or maximum archetypal masculine. But then you can see here, the top line would be, say, a person born biologically female with their moon or Venus position in one of these signs. And some of them are way over to maximum yin, and some of them are actually very yang. So actually, there are many people born biologically female who are far more toward archetypal masculine, like Aries, Leo, Scorpio, and this is more related to our current time. This would look a little different, say, 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It could be looking different even 30 years from now. All right, but this is the experience that we've had in the school of how these things play out as far as the archetypes themselves, not whether you're born, what a man or a woman is supposed to be. And the same thing here, if you look at the last line, where you have masculine line would mean if you're born biologically men there. So you basically have obviously Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, Scorpio as being very toward the yang, actional. But then there are expressions of biological men that are way more toward yin. Pisces, Cancer, things that would generally be called, well, that's a woman's thing or something, you know? No, these are archetypal expressions, valid archetypal expressions of the masculine, right? So Pisces, but you see that some of the same ones are over toward yin because Cancer and Pisces, Cancer, you know, and Libra these days, and Virgo are the ones that are clearly the archetypal feminine ones. Now, you might be surprised to have Libra in there, but for men, Libra is so much about others, so much about personal relationships, that it certainly doesn't show up as a, you know, sort of a macho male kind of thing.
Right. I was curious about Cancer coming before Pisces on the bottom line, and I was assuming that was because a Cancerian male may be in a father role.
That's right.
That's
a more responsible role of taking care of others, so that because they're born men in the current culture, and if they are like in a company or if they're in a family, if they're in a position of some degree of responsibility where they're providing nourishment, then it's a bit more actional than Pisces. The same reason why Taurus is over there also. There's going to be, I mean, this is certainly one that is open for further inquiry for sure, because even a Taurian type male, which is more about, Taurus is more about receiving, it's not a giver, it's the receiver aspect of both men and women. But men are not usually trained to be receivers the way we would normally think. So therefore there tends to be, for the Taurian type male, that they may actually express themselves a bit more actionally. But their intimacy style, their way of wanting to be loved is going to be the, I want to be given to. Right. You know, rather it's not a macho, I'm in command and control and the actional party. Yeah. So that would be, this is more like how these are ways of understanding that are relative to our current time. You know, they're if I was doing you're going to see here shortly the card deck and some of the imagery that we presented, but this is all relative to our current time. If we did a similar kind of thing, you know, 100 years from now, this whole schemata might look a bit different.
Yeah, and your view of the archetypes is similar to mine in that they're not set in stone. They're flexible, and they, like you're just saying, they change with the culture. I mean, archetypes in 30 years could look really different at the speed that we're going with change right now.
That's a really interesting point, because I do think from a Jungian perspective, there are certain archetypes that are more eternal,
Yes.
like mother, father,
Right.
and like which from a spiritual perspective is called Christos Sophia. You know, so you have the primary elements of our journey. All right. Even there though, that boy, I'm just realizing we could have a great conversation about this, just this piece, because in my own research, if you go further back into pre-Greek and even way back in hunter-gatherer cultures, that the preeminent, the first principle is feminine. So it's like the whole overall womb of all possibilities, and so that and of course Christianity and the religions of the book turned that around. So they tried to turn to the masculine principle as number one, but there's even elements of it in early Genesis that shows the different way of looking at that. But they're still like, those are kind of eternal, right? But meanwhile, this is one of the distinctions between Jungian's view and the post-Jungians.
Right.
People like Charles Ponce and some of the tremendous women writers that have come out of the Jungian community can recognize that different time periods in history will alter the archetypes. You know, so Hera, the statue of Hera 2,000 years ago is going to not be the same as now. You know, so there is the eternal archetypes are not eternal in the sense of the way Jung made it sound like. You know, like no matter where you are in the world, you know, the collective unconscious, you know, that they all look the same. They don't. That's not my view.
Back to this chart here, this continuum, one thing I found really interesting, and that's why I'm so glad you put this together, is that Aquarius is closer to the middle. Because I mean, it's definitely, I don't think of it as actional, but as I've been studying, I've thought of it as masculine, because it's an air sign. But it's so terrific to see these placed along a continuum to get you know, a more refined flavor of each of them.
Yeah, that will actually come up. That comes up in when doing a deeper dive into the relationship axes. You know, so you would have, for both men or women, if it's Leo Aquarius, you can actually understand how one is more actional than the other. Leo being more than Aquarius, but it is true that Aquarius is archetypally masculine. In the previous video blog that I did with Mary last month, we had some of the diagrams, you know, showing how fire, air, water, and earth, you know, from the most subtle to the most dense. And so if we applied that to yin and yang, or archetypal masculine and feminine, air and fire are closer, getting up to the top of pure yang, while the ones of earth and water are getting closer to the more maximum yin. And that would be true for both men or women. You know, it doesn't matter your biology on that one.
Right, right.
So I put up here that relative to the quote West, meaning the US, EU, crown colonies, and those who have been overshadowed by it, you know, so this is sort of a modern quote Western, the way it's played out. I mean, this would not work the same way in, for example, the Philippines, unless, except for the intellectual elite, you know, but not for the Catholic substratum, you know. Then you have to actually translate it into a Catholic worldview.
Yeah, I could see that.
So let's look at these next two that will also advance our inquiry into this full spectrum. Now, we certainly are not going to have a chance to go through every one of these, but what this was inspired by was the work of Tony Wolff. Jung's companion, his a medial woman, and also kind of a courtesan type for a while. And she had a marvelously original contribution to archetypes by dividing the feminine principle into 4 types. And that's represented here. And the words she used were like Amazon, women whose identity are based upon accomplishments, achievements, and freedom, star women, and so on. And then the mother, wife, which was what Jean Bolin would refer to as the vulnerable goddesses, or the vulnerable expression of the feminine, because their identity is based upon a partner or their kids. And then you would have the hetera, the word that Tony Wolff used because of the, even then, back in the 20s, the pejorative connotation of the word courtesan, right? So it's basically a full exploration of intimacy as art, not for the sake of having kids or fulfilling a marriage vow.
Mhm.
And then the medial, which would be that full-on connection to spirit, a complete in service to spirit dedication. And you can see a general sense here on this schemata of how the signs line up. It's for those that might be not that familiar with this body of knowledge. This is not based on sun sign, okay? I mean, although you can certain flavors from sun sign, but this is much more based upon your moon or Venus or rising sign positions, and particularly for women, the Venus position, and for men, the Mars position. We have, this is one of the main inquiries we use in our course, and we went into it more deeply in the in some previous seminars. So let's look at the next one, and you'll see a similar schemata for the archetypal masculine. This is just inspired by Tony Wolff's vision of this, but this plays out a slightly different way. There have actually been some writers in the last 20 or 30 years. I think you know who I'm speaking of. Their names escape me right now. They write these books on male archetypes, you know. So you have, you know, the king, you have the warrior, you have the lover, you have the priest. You know, there's different expressions archetypally of the masculine. Well, since we're doing a full spectrum approach, not just 4, they kind of play out at our current time like this. So what's in red here is taking it all the way back to hunter-gatherer times, prior to patriarchy. So you would have these 4 as the headman, the hunter. There really wasn't one that would have to do with the lover, and then you would have the shaman or the clown. You know, so that's comes from the work of Robert Lawler and others that go into how the masculine was understood before it got split off entirely, or before men got split off entirely into just a sky god. So you get the fuller sense of the possibilities here. That's why I put those in. And then we would have a lot of the other key words for these different categories. And you'll notice, and I'm sure Elise, you couldn't help but notice what's down at the far left on both of these.
Yes, I did. I said to myself, wow, look at Aquarius. It gets to just be itself so freely in these, you know.
It can be pretty much, it can, yeah, even more free in some ways than Gemini, because it's an outsider or an outlier.
Mhm.
Can be anything as long as it's free and unique. Gemini, what makes Gemini less free is that it actually has an in-service to spirit role, while Aquarius is far more. It's like the utter epitome of self-exploration, expanding consciousness as wide as far as possible for its own sake.
Right.
Did you were you noticing anything else there that sparked your curiosity or interest before we go to the cards?
Nothing in particular, just again, it really, this and the yin-yang continuum just really deepen everything. So I'm appreciative of you putting this together.
But this is still, in a sense, prelude in our conversation today to how, on a more practical level, this would play out in personal relationships, and then also, depending on what your intent is for a more agreement-oriented long-term relationship, you know, what is going to be fulfilling or not.
Right.
So why don't we go to the 24 genders then?
Okay. Should we start here?
Yeah, sure. So this comes from the divination card deck that our school produced. And this is from the cards, 24 cards, representing the gods and the goddesses, or we could say in a more modern language, the 24 archetypal expressions of men and women. So there's 12 goddess cards that are the 12 Venus positions for women, and 12 Mars cards for 12 cards for that could represent Mars for men. And so here we created these cards so there would be a kind of a flavor or a kind of what would we call it, a visceral sense to them, you know, a sort of feeling, and try to engage as many of the senses as possible, and mind and senses as possible in looking at this. Mm-hmm. So if you remember, Aries was one that was way to the end of the spectrum of archetypal yang or masculine, and that would apply to a female, a woman born with Venus in Aries. A lot of times the moon comes into play too, because in this paradigm, the moon is your lineage. You come in with that. So if a woman comes in with Aries moon, then there's a certain flavor to this. This has very much to do with commitment to a cause or a purpose. It has interesting applications in relationship intent, which is the capacity to commit, kind of a black and white, all-in commitment kind of thing. But not, Aries is not always relational. So, I mean, so Aries, I mean, there's many images for Aries, for particularly ancient imagery for women, Aries, that is not about a wife. You know, it's about someone who is defending her people, or the Joan of Arcs, the Queen Boudicca's, and so on. Now, again, we're not going to have a chance here in our limited time to go through every one of these. We can briefly go through each one of these, remembering when you're looking at this that we're applying it to 12 Venus positions, women, 12 Mars positions for men, to get a flavor for them. What I want to suggest as we go through these, Elise, is the ones that particularly you've experienced. I mean, not in your personal life per se, but like in your counseling work, or, you know, in your awareness of the people you work with and the culture around us, the ones that you think require a little bit more investigation.
Yeah. Well, on Aries itself, when we get to the relationship axes, I have some questions about that, about how Aries and Libra
work
together. But I've seen Aries in that black and white, all-in commitment. The loyalty that I've seen in Aries is extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
And this nobility of purpose. I mean, I think at its best, within the framework of patriarchy, that nobility expression of Aries is what was originally meant by the word chivalry.
Yeah. And so with Aries, it's, I guess that all in black and white commitment is kind of what it's up to. And as far as intimacy, since we're talking about intimacy and sexuality, it seems like that's an area that it doesn't know as much about, of course, as some other signs would.
Yeah, because it's fast, it's strong, its mission and I am here to protect you. Don't question how deep my feelings are, because I'm 100% here to protect you, you know, that kind of thing. And don't question my commitment, you know. Why are you continually trying to find out what I really feel?
Yeah, that was good astro drama on that. That was good.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also, I mean, just to be somewhat, you know, generalized about it, the intimacy style of Aries for men or women is fast.
Fast.
I sometimes just in general use the expression velocity addict,
right,
for this.
On the go.
Yeah, come on, slow down, slow. So this is like often the judgment that in certain cases, you know, in certain circles, where women will have a concern that the man they're with is just too fast.
Yeah, and what I always say about this amazing paradigm we're talking about is that once you know these things, you can have great compassion for a partner who may be moving really fast. But if you don't know that that's that person's archetypal makeup, part of their makeup, you could be making all kinds of judgments about it.
Yeah, this is actually part of the deeper relationship counseling work that can come from this. So for example, if you happen to be, a woman happens to be with a guy with Mars in Aries, or Aries moon, but that's not what you're wanting, it's not necessarily the case to say they're bad or wrong, but because that's just the way they are. So you have a choice to either take them as they are, right? Or to choose not to be with someone who doesn't match what it is what would work for you. In other cases, if two people really love each other, and if you happen to be with someone who's not the style that you initially were hoping for, you can in fact work it out, but it requires both to be on the same page, you know. So you could say, well, I get how you like it to be, so I'll give you 4 hours on Thursday morning and a few hours on Saturday night, and we'll value how you like to do it. But meanwhile, you need to be equally sensitive to what my needs are, right?
Yeah. Should we move to the next one?
Yes.
Okay. Taurus.
Now, in our school, our view of Taurus is a bit different than the sun sign descriptions of Taurus. When I say a bit different, actually, that's a lot different. So that we're trying to revalue Taurus in a really deep valuing of intimacy, physical intimacy, even emotional intimacy, but in a very savoring kind of way. In a sense, it's absolutely the opposite of Aries. So Taurus is like, this is really good. Why not have it last as long as possible? Right? There's no other place to get to.
Right. So slow. So slow. It's so, this paradigm is so different that I don't know if you remember, I didn't even know what the shadow side of Taurus was. I didn't even know what it was. And every time I listened to things about Taurus outside of our school, it's associated with money and stubbornness. And I was like, everybody's just missing the boat completely on.
Yeah, I mean, I have clients all the time who have a bunch of Taurus, but they're completely on the shadow side. It's all about security and how much money, and they don't even have the capacity to really savor, enjoy what they have.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it also brings out, you can see from the imagery here, the way the masculine version of Taurus looks. It's an earth god.
Yeah.
It's an earth god. And actually, in the old days, before patriarchy, the earth god gained his sovereignty by marrying the land.
I
And
love
obviously, the female version is beauty and aesthetics, but it's not just to be like the cultural view of beauty, but it's rather that's a version of the goddess that defines what beauty is and aesthetics is, and but it's also not a superficial expression, but they bring it into the depths of their being. Every one of these could, in fact, we do have the deep dives into every one of these on separate video blogs, but the purpose of our discussion today is actually to spread out, to see the entire spectrum, and to be able to value each of these within their own sphere of expertise.
Mhm.
And it's not that all human beings are not the same. We're all human beings, but each expression of each of the 24 gender archetypes, a man's Mars, a woman's Venus, describes these different styles and different approaches.
So on sexuality and intimacy, I mean, we know Taurus is slow, wants to savor, explore pleasure and intimacy just for the sake of it.
Yes.
Is there anything more you could say about that?
Well, yeah. The other factor is it's not about it's about receiving,
Right.
but right receivership. So it's not indiscriminate receiving. Yeah. So because part of being an epicure, part of aesthetics and intimacy, the way we're looking at it here, is about knowing what's good.
Yes. You once told me when a Taurian person walks into a room, they're going to know right away if it's right for them or not. And so that the whole environment, the whole situation has to be right, and that's what you mean by right receivership. Otherwise, it's just a no.
Well, meeting the standards of what intimacy from the perspective of Taurus really is. Yeah. I mean, like a Cancer form of intimacy might be, well, gee, this is to provide nourishment or to have a child, right? Or to take care of others. But this is an entirely different motive. It's the savoring of intimacy for its own sake. Mm-hmm. Including physical, so there's other forms of there's other archetypes that the intimacy is the physical aspect of it is extremely low priority.
Right. So for a man that identifies or has a Taurian archetype, a lot of that, or maybe Mars and Taurus, and that's Taurus is the biggest receiver sign of the whole spectrum. Yeah. How does that go for a man in Taurus?
How does it go? Sorry again?
Meaning, how would sexuality, would the man who identifies with Taurus or has a lot of Taurus energy want to be receiving from the female?
They want to be adored as having great aesthetics. They want to be valued for their great taste in color and their great taste in food, things like that. It's basically an epicure expression, but and I'm speaking of it as in the most positive attributes. I mean, every one of them has their shadow. You're inquiring more deeply here into Taurus. I can always tell you my favorite story about, I used to live in Los Angeles in the late 70s, and many of my clients were women who had gone there to make it big in movies or music or, models or actresses and so on. And they would always show me the charts of their boyfriends. And invariably their boyfriends had a lot of Taurus. And of course they were gorgeous guys. But the women would always say the same complaint. All he does is just lie there. I have to do all the work. He just simply wants to be adored, as if he is like this beautiful courtesan who now is incarnated in a beautiful male body. but I have to do, I'm the one who does the, who takes care of them even, you know, so.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah,
Should we move on?
yes.
Okay.
So here's an air one,
Mhm.
but it's not to the aggressive male version, right? So for men or women, here it's really similar. That there's elements of the Gemini god or goddess that are shapeshifters, that are free electrons, magical beings, who are ones that consider life to be a dance or acting, or for the fun of it, making light of whatever of those take seriously. That's why it's always been considered to be connected to the coyotes. You can see that here on one of the cards. It's actually on both cards. But it's also that like sort of the butterfly kind of thing, you know, the female Peter Pan. And then the masculine version of it is often like the Native Americans, you know, like the Cocopele, the itinerant musician, the flute player, um, the magical being who can be anything he wants to be, and both of these are outside the rules and regulations of that even the chief, you know, the average people in the culture don't have to follow. They follow certain standards, but not Gemini. But it's in service to spirit. Their action is not out of self-interest. There is if we were going into great depth on every one of these, I'll just mention about Gemini. There's a well-known male version of Gemini, which is the Western, Spain, France, whatever version of Don Juan. The Don Juan loved women, just as Hermes loved women, but he would shapeshift into whatever it is he believed the woman wanted him to be. And it was usually a very magical encounter, as long as the woman did not project boyfriend, husband, or father. You know, so that's just basic. I'm not saying all Gemini types don't, at some point, don't want to have a bond with someone, but the general Gemini characteristic is to remain free, but to actually show up in a magical way for how the partner wants them to be.
Yeah.
It
Yes.
also, like like we were talking before, it's more similar to Aries in the sense that its experience of intimacy is not the feeling function. It's a mental kind of thing. You know, I can sense I can mentally pick up on what that other person wants me to be, and I'll be that.
Yeah. And then move on, possibly.
Yeah. Right, and remain free. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so here we have we looked at this on the schemata before, that for the far end of the spectrum toward the end is this for both men or women. And here we have in patriarchy, the Cancer could be the nurturing father. But it also in a culture can be the person who in some ways is similar, like an ally of Aries, they're the ones that they provide the safety and the security for their family or for their city or their culture. The Aries Cancer combination, we always find that like in firemen, or sometimes in the best sense of it, the most idealistic sense of it, the police. Not the militaristic, kick-ass version, but the ones that are really caring about their family and community. In our current time period, there are many couples where the woman is the Amazonian. She's out, beating the men at their own games, actually. But then her husband, her partner, is like the one who's taking care of the kids. which is very authentic and fulfilling if it's Mars in Cancer.
Right.
We always find this also when women meet men, and maybe the woman is very clear. She doesn't want any kids. But if she has a partner with Mars in Cancer, I mean, he would legitimately want to have that experience at some point.
Mhm.
You know, so these are, I'm not trying to say it 100%, but I mean, this is usually what we find over many, many, many different cases. So we've gone through here 4 of them and given examples. Maybe we can just briefly go through the other ones so that we have enough time to touch on the relationship axes.
For sure.
So here we have another one that's way toward the yang for both men and women. And this is different than Aries. This is about pure creatorship. You know, I can make it up any way you want. The vision carrier, the alpha leading, the leading man, the leading woman. But the reason why that card on the right has not, I mean, it looks like a child of some kind, right? Is that there's a Leo quality that is about being a really healthy 2-year-old or a child, where they're not like trying to please anyone. You know, they're just making it up any way they want, and there's a courage to it. There's a playfulness also, like Gemini. The ability to just have the freedom to be creator.
Yeah.
And then inspiring others to be that. So that's another ingredient of it. You know, it's actually the only other one of the archetypes that even has a flavor of receiving. Because in an intimacy style, I mean, if you happen to be with a partner with Leo, oh my goodness, they want praise. They just to love, oh, you're so incredible, you're so amazing. But unlike other archetypes, it doesn't go to their head. It actually causes them to be more vulnerable. Oh, you love me just as I am. Wow, you know, that sort of thing.
That's
So
a great distinction.
it always works to give them praise.
Mm-hmm. Virgo.
Now, the Virgo archetype could have its own separate video blog.
Mm.
This is one that may be the most comprehensive version of intimacy that exists, because the word I love for this one is discrimination. So it's not critical, picky, judgmental. It's just that it's wired in such a way that intimacy, at whatever level of intimacy it is, spiritual, emotional, psychological, physical, whatever level, it must be sacred. So for Virgo, secular sexuality is a very low priority, as would be the kind of wifely duty or husband duty kind of thing, you know, where, you know, we're in a relationship, so therefore there's certain things that are expected. No, the timings have to be right, but all the levels of intimacy need to be addressed.
Right.
And this can be in our current time period, although men are getting a bit better with this. Very difficult for men in general to understand this about Virgo when it shows up in their Virgo partner.
I can really see that. And I've heard about that personally in my life with people I know. Yeah.
There is a more emerging version of Virgo for men, which is different than simply the judgment of it as being workaholic or not even being intimate or not being available for intimacy, which is the version of the masculine that just considers the sacred feminine to be the most fascinating thing that exists on the planet. So they create space for it, and they know they can't ever totally figure it out, but they do find it as interesting, if not more interesting, than their work.
Right. Like the high priest of the feminine.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Yep. but from a sacred perspective, right? This is not like the guru who has favors from the female disciples.
Right. No, I understand. Libra.
A greatly misunderstood one in our current time. In fact, I've had members of the like generation in their 20s that say, well, Libra is just stupid, or Libra is purely patriarchal, you know, because it's actually and obviously a lot of Libra that is out there is codependent and patriarchal as far as the maybe the Christian male-female relationship. But we're speaking here of conscious equal partnership and the value of a bond with another person, not because you have to, but because it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so it ends up becoming the epitome of collaboration. So for a man who has a lot of Libra, they're great strength, or as Jung put it, there's his sword quality, you know, is his capacity to be a good, to relate, to be a good relationship guy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you happen to be with a woman with Venus in Libra or a man with Mars in Libra, they want to be valued for their partnership qualities, you know. And so a very interesting advice I generally give is that let's suppose a woman is with a guy with Mars in Libra, and according to her, maybe she has a lot of Capricorn or Virgo, right? And she has this view, a partner should have these 12 components, and he only shows 3 or 4 of them. Well, it's way better to give him strokes for those 3 or 4 than to judge him for the ones he doesn't do well, because then he'll more likely to want to develop the other ones because they want to be a good partner.
Yeah, I've experienced Libra energy, and it wasn't anything I'd experienced before. And I was amazed at how much back and forth happened, how much the person inquired about what it was I was feeling or thinking. And there were just these kind of conversations that went back and forth in a way that I hadn't experienced before. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and there is, of course, there's the shadow side of that, which is you're in a relationship with a Libra, and then it's like the standard issue, like there's caricatures of this. Well, what do you want to do, dear? Well, I don't know. What do you want to do, dear? Well, I don't know. What do you want to do? You know, so basically no one is actually taking any action.
Yeah.
Or they cannot take an action until they see something clear in the eyes of another person, you know. So that answers what I think your question was going to be about the Aries Libra axis.
It might. Well, let's get there and
right.
Go on to the next one. Scorpio.
Utterly, completely visceral, but from an actional perspective. It's not the caricature of Scorpio being hidden and secretive and denied and repressed. So, I mean, Scorpio, again, this could be a whole video blog just on this. In some ways, it is exactly the opposite of Virgo, where Virgo's intimacy is top down, but it can certainly include sacred intimacy, you know, physical intimacy. But Scorpio, if it ain't happening on the first or second chakra level, then, you know, either you feel it or you don't. You know, so the ability to value that aliveness is super important. Go ahead.
I was just thinking of what you've told Scorpionic people, which is if you're in a relationship where your battery isn't being charged, well, then that's a clue that you might be in the wrong relationship for yourself.
Yeah, right. You know, why? So why do you? Well, it was only good in the first year. Well, how come now it's the 20th year and you're starving for having your aliveness stimulated? You know.
And I think for Scorpio too, for all the other signs, I think it's very difficult to understand that sexuality, maybe intimacy style of Scorpio, unless you've had an experience of it, because it really is like this person has a weather vane above them and is channeling the energy of the cosmos down into the person. I mean, it's really,
or actually up from the center of the earth up also. I mean, so that's why it's like before patriarchy, the example of this was the Shakti feminine. That's why we put this closer to the yang side than the yin side.
Yeah.
because that was the time in history that the feminine principle through Shakti was the active force.
Mm. Right.
And it's also, in my opinion, one of the reasons why core patriarchy hates Scorpio. You know, they turned it into, you know, witches, and, you know, how dare a woman like sex or something like that, you know. Islam is a good example of that problem, as is Catholicism in a lot of ways. Here we go. Here we have the female and the male version really similar. It's toward the yang, but in the sense of looking for the truth, the vision, going to meaning and purpose, to boldly go where no one has gone before. It's an example of both male and female that are in the quest for the logos. You know, this is for women way connected to what is referred to by Sophia. And so it's not mother goddess, it's not Shakti goddess, it's the consciousness, and the consciousness, or the chit, CHIT expression of the feminine.
Mhm.
And the masculine is in quest for that. You know, it's like looking for the grail, you know, looking for the freedom that comes by fully knowing male and female.
Yeah. We'll save my questions on this for when we get to the axes.
Yes. So, I mean, just a thought on these, because, you know, this could actually be part one of a further investigation that could be just around how to value each archetype in a relationship, right? You know, it would actually be a slightly more, I won't say intellectual, but a slightly more a practical application to what could be a something I've done around fireplaces or with small groups. Like, what are the foreplay styles between men and women regarding the different archetypes? You know, so I mean, I'll give you an example of this when we get to Aquarius in a moment. So Capricorn is about knowledge and practicality and honoring some and respect, that they really the desire for respect. I mean, this is the elder place on the wheel of life, and they've done their research, and clearly there's shadow side of this, but the positive side of this, when you have the Capricorn archetype, is they really do want to be of help, and they want to be able to share what they've spent their life gaining knowledge about. Sure, the downside can be that they're a know-it-all, but if you give them the opportunity to share what they know, not as a control program, but as a desire to help, wow, what a great person to have as your partner, particularly if you have a family or you're running a business, or you're making it work, trying to make it work in the world.
Right. Right. Yes, I relate.
And then this is always very embarrassing when I look at the way the artist did this card for the god. He was taking photographs of people, you know, and I didn't know he was going to do this, but he put a younger picture of me on there. And I'm certainly not Aquarius, but it describes the exploration of consciousness for its own sake. Now, see, when it comes to, this is like Sophic also for women, but as far as like an intimacy approach, it's classic. I mean, I've known so many examples of this in my own life and with clients and so on, where what would be, how do you relate to an Aquarian type? You certainly might want to say, well, they might say, well, let's first meditate together, or let's first discuss this book list, or, you know, let's first look at it from a spiritual / intellectual level, you know, and then if you pass those tests, then we might consider other things, right?
Yep, I get that too.
Mm-hmm. And then we have this one, which most resembles Cancer, but it tends to be more transpersonal. And so the Piscean approach is wanting to their capacity to sense into how others feel, particularly from the perspective of where their grief, sorrow, and hurts are, and wanting to be of help. But that leaves out an ingredient of that's sort of standard Pisces kind of things, but it leaves out something that is really super important to understand about masculine Pisces. It would be true for Pisces, for the female Pisces also, but there's an interesting approach that we find for the male version, and it's this hunger for expanded states of consciousness, a hunger for rapturous altered states. Now that rapturous altered states can come in the intimacy, you know, so you merge into a place that is transcendent, and it's different than the Scorpio version, right? But it also for men, since it happens to be a giver position, you hardly need to ever say this for women Pisces, because they obviously know it's a giver position. You know, it's a part of the female principle, and what women are supposed to be within patriarchy is being givers anyway. But for men, Pisces is the great ecstatic joy of assisting their partner. And again, I'm saying a woman, but it could be if they have a same-sex relationship, then it's still the same archetypal expression. The great joy of providing the experience for their partner to have their maximum experience, assisting the other, and just going all the way with what they're capable of feeling.
This is Dionysus and the Maenads, right? Like following him over the hills with this intoxicating substance and getting out of their regular.
Best music, the best drugs,
Yeah.
And that actually is early Jesus also, so I mean, not post-Nicene Creed Christianity, but the earlier versions, which is the male disciples usually got kind of upset that he was hanging out with the women that much.
Should we move to the axes now?
Yes.
Okay.
Now this is just a taste of how this would apply to answering questions like, well, if you're going to be in a long-term committed relationship, number one, why would you want to do it? And number two, how can you tell if you're on the right track? Yeah, I find it interesting, Elise, you put the Taurus Scorpio one in first. So this is the so-called tantric one, the visceral one, the life force one. Either you feel it or you don't. And so the bottom line for being in a partnership or a relationship, whether it's your mate or whether it's any kind of collaborator, is that it takes you further than you've gone before into feeling, going beyond the edge of what you previously felt, taking you deeper into everything you can feel. The edge of aliveness is what the purpose of the partnership relationship would be. So if you're in a partnership, let's say where you got married in an early age, and it was and you wanted to have 3 kids, and then you get to your mid-40s and it's an empty nest, and wait a minute, I'm Scorpio rising or Taurus rising, what am I haven't had those adventures yet, so you want to explore this more.
Right.
It can happen at the beginning too. I mean, so I'm just saying that's an example of what comes up sometimes. So this one is about what's happening in your emotions in your physical body.
Yeah.
Is it aliveness or not?
Yeah, something that's coming up here is that if you were a person that married or partnered with somebody who had this rising sign or a Mars or something like that, I can imagine that desire discrepancy would come up quite a bit. And
yes.
Have you seen that in this situation before?
Oh my gosh, yes. This might be controversial to put it this way, but I've had this experience of working with couples, and they're in their 20th year, 25th year, and And one of them, the reason they came to counseling is because one had been caught having an affair.
Mm.
So if the one who had the affair was Scorpio or Taurus rising, or it could also be, Venus or Mars in Scorpio too, and then you look into what the nature of the relationship had been, oh my God, well, we only got together because our parents wanted us to get together, or we only got together in order to have a family. I'm not being critical of that at all. That might be one of their intentions. However, if that intensity and passion and aliveness was not there, usually what I would say, well, how could you possibly have waited to the 20th year before you finally did something about it? This should have been part of any kind of counseling in the second or third year.
Well, this is in the sexuality and intimacy department. That's why this is really important. When you get together with somebody, you can kind of home in on like, are styles similar, or if they're not, is one able to meet the other? Like you said, on a Thursday, I'll give you 4 hours of my time. Right. But it's so good to know these things up front.
Yeah, it's like putting all the cards on the table up front, and it's. I'll reserve that for a part two. Just some experiences I've had where I get a couple to work with, but they haven't had sessions originally, and then I'll see, that, oh my goodness, they don't match up. How can I say something in this session, that
Right.
That's a whole other thing about counseling, but never mind. Let's go on to the next one.
All right. Gemini, Sagittarius.
Space, freedom, questmate, trailmate. The reason we're together is because we have highly prioritized in our relationship meaning and purpose and philosophy and adventure and spirituality. The number one reason why they be together.
Yeah.
I can give you so many different examples of what can possibly happen here, where the man or woman is with a woman who's not with a partner who's not on the same axis. So they're trying to convince the partner, be interested in my spiritual path, be interested in the countries I want to go visit, be interested in my interest in meaning and purpose and so on. And the partner says, that's just my wife's kooky hobbies, or, oh, that's your department, dear, So to be that can be a real trouble. So that ends relationships if the man is strong enough to recognize what their intent is.
Yeah. My experience with Sagittarius, and I've told you this before, but hadn't had a lot of experience with it. And when I did, I thought, wow, this is so interesting. This, the conversation and curiosity. And then I quickly realized that there isn't a ton of emotional depth to Sagittarius.
That's true. Right. So in this case, the intimacy, because remember the word intimacy simply means closeness. Mm-hmm. Intimacy is connected to inside, interior. Well, physical sexuality is only one of the expressions of intimacy. Mm-hmm. So therefore, in some, like the example of Aquarius, the intimacy is spiritual or intellectual intimacy, right? And here it's philosophical and adventurous intimacy, not like the visceral first, second, third chakra stuff that would happen with Taurus Scorpio.
Again, so good to know, right? That intimacy doesn't mean just that one narrow version of what we think it does.
And the example we gave before about Virgo, which I think will come up here next, which is comprehensive, utterly sacred discrimination about what intimacy is. So, I mean, they would just be, if their natural tendency, if they're just listening to what we said about Taurus Scorpio, it's like, no.
All right, we'll move to the next one. Pisces, Virgo. Yeah.
And well, this is the one we've described as you're with a partner because it makes what you were born to do in service to spirit easier to do. Mm-hmm. And so that individual, and these days it's like an equality between the two of them, So I mean, if your sacred work was you're a singer-songwriter, well, then the partner is the drummer or the manager, right? The priest and priestess together. It's very different than the patriarchal version of it, which is, I mean, a guy can love you as long as you're totally into what he's into.
Mm.
Or in matriarchy, the end times of matriarchy, that the guy is allowed to be with the alpha woman if he passes certain tests, but then he gets sacrificed.
Mhm.
You know, so we don't want either of those two extremes. I mean, this is a genuine priest, priestess, helpmate kind of path.
Mhm.
And you can feel that you're with the right person, because by being with them, it makes it easier to do what you're born to do.
Yeah, so the intimacy style, then, in a way, I can almost see these. Well, we know Virgo's impersonal, and Virgo doesn't necessarily innately know a lot about relationship because it is impersonal. It's in its cottage in the woods doing its sacred work. So, in a sense, are these two, when they're in relationship, they're together, but the focus is the sacred work.
That's correct. Right, right. So, so like some of them, the number one issue, like with Aries Libra, which we'll get to, the number one reason being together is the relationship.
Right.
With
Right.
Cancer Capricorn, the number one thing is what you're building together.
Mm-hmm.
But the other ones, it's usually not the relationship itself that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the relationship is happening to fulfill other soul objectives.
Right.
Like,
yeah. And again, very nice to know up front if the person you're getting in relationship with has a focus on their sacred work, but not on their relationship.
Yep.
All
Right.
right.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're a person who wants a partner who just is totally always just sold out to them,
Yeah.
but your partner is Virgo rising, I'm sorry, but you know, they may be able to include commitment in a personal relationship, but their number one thing is what they were born to actually do in their calling or their sacred work. And you need to understand that.
Right. Right. It's important. Okay, Libra Aries. I have questions on this, but you go ahead and introduce it.
Well, I mean, we're looking at 6 axes, right, which would classically be referred to as an opposition. But we're looking at pairs of mystery schools. And in our school, we actually perceive these pairs as having more in common. So I don't even like using the word opposition. So it's more of a resonant polarity. There are clearly differences, but they're filling in what is missing at the other polarity, at the other end of the polarity. If we're looking at an archetypal definition of an opposition, using that word, it is Libra Aries. Because Libra defines who they are by who they're with. Aries defines who they are by their mission and purpose through their self. Now, a good example of how I've experienced this in the past is that every Libra type can value what Aries contributes. Because if it's like 2 Libras together, then it's like, what do you do? What do you want to do? Well, what do you want to do? Well, Aries is just going to say, we're doing this. Okay. But seldom does the Aries type value Libra in the same way.
Isn't that so hard for Libra?
Well, to make the relationship work, they both need to value each other for their contribution. And I'm just saying, this is not all Aries types have their mission and purpose being a relationship. But if they do, then they would certainly need to value Libra's contribution. I mean, this goes back to some of the other Yang ones, you know, Leo and the other examples we gave there, that if an Amazonian type woman or a warrior type male is relational, then they have to learn to value what is missing in them. And so like Aries it would be valuing what's missing in them, which is relational characteristics. Aries contribute, well, what will I contribute? Action, decision, commitment. But Libra is sharing, is contributing the personal thing.
Mm-hmm. So you had said that in this axis, you know, there would be a lot of processing of the relationship, but I guess the Aries side of it would need to learn to like that or engage in that.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing about like valuing what the other partner needs, you know, what the partner needs. It is certainly the case that sometimes the full Libra type is going to get frustrated by Aries, which doesn't have any idea what they're really wanting from them. And that's when the Aries type would say, but I'm committed to you.
Right.
Why are you questioning this? You know, but the Aries type is eventually going to have to say, wow, you mean you really want us to talk more? You really want to actually process to me, processing it means there's something wrong with it.
Right.
No, there's value just in being able to share about it. You know, I can't help but think of this example where this really happened. It's this old friend of mine from years ago who had lots of Aries, and Aries can be lacking in vulnerability. So we were talking about vulnerability in a men's circle, and he says, yeah, let's get into vulnerability, because then I'll know what I need to do better, but not vulnerability. But, you know, I can defend against this, you know, so I won't be vulnerable. So he said, no, you don't really get it. It's like vulnerability is a strength. You know?
Oh, gosh, that's funny. All right, let's move on to Cancer Capricorn.
Last one here, yeah. So this is another one that's classically understood in more recent culture, actually throughout all of history. And the reason people are together are to build a culture, you know, to have a family, to build a house, to build a community. You know, so it's your basic family householder one, caring and commitment to accomplish the goal of nurturing family and community. And even if you don't have your own kids or have a family, it's still there as a builder of the community, and you're making a contribution there. So it's more of a practical reason for being together.
Yeah, so I could see maybe the intimacy style of these two being much more practical about we're partners and we have a partnership and we run a household or we run a family or something to that effect. And so
well, it's remember, this is as the bottom line for why you would form a long-term relationship.
Right.
But clearly, if you're in a Cancer Capricorn type relationship, but you have an unfulfilled Venus and Taurus or an unfulfilled Mars and Scorpio, you know, then those things need to be taken into account at a certain point.
Right. But I could see that in this axis here, commitment is a given if we're talking about long-term partnerships. And so for the person on either side, if they're wanting commitment, they're going to probably find it here.
Yeah, like even within the confines of the patriarchal approach at the end of Kali Yuga, there can be a tremendous heartfulness in this one if two people get together and they're raising kids, and the commitment to be together until they're grown is an important commitment to make within the confines of that approach. You know, we don't have maybe grandmothers or sisters or other members of the family of the community that are there helping out, like in a hunter-gatherer community or in a matrilineal community. So to be able to maintain that commitment to the children's till they get to their maturities, that's a good reason for commitment.
Right. We've got one last one, Leo Aquarius.
So when it comes to relationship intent, this is the possible bottom line for all of them, which is where relationship is founded on autonomy and sovereignty. And it's designed to break apart any possibility of what can be all too often called codependency, where you're defining who you are by who you're with in a weak way. this can, of course, get very extreme, so much so that some Leo and Aquarius types will just say, well, I'm just free. I mean, they're the ones that might say, oh, Libra, just weakness. Libra is just stupid. Or, you know, that it's all just patriarchal. You know, this is about freedom and liberty and so on. But if you want to have a long-term relationship that works, this is the one that pretty much demands that both are on the same page with us. You know, they do it out of a choice. Like you're sitting across the table from someone and, you know, I'm fine on my own, I don't need you. And the other would say, well, that's true for me too. And then there's this sparkle that goes across, you know, wow, let's choose to be together, you know.
Yeah. Well,
Completely have freedom and choice.
would you be able to say anything in general about the intimacy style? I imagine the two of them are kind of grooving on their own thing and their own freedom, and they come together.
Well, then it would all, I think, at least then it would completely, very much depend upon the Venus and Mars positions, you know, about like what, in fact, there are plenty of Leo Aquarius type relationships that will choose any of them, you know, depending on what their other parts of the chart are. They could choose something which is, let's be together for 30 years in a pair bond, or they could choose, well, let's just be together as long as it meets our freedom needs, or let's just be, you know, so it could actually try any of them out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Very flexible. Yeah. Great.
Okay, so we've, I guess we've probably done this longer than we first had imagined. But it certainly does open the door to I think it would be really wonderful if you wanted to have a part 2 in a few months.
I would love that. I think that'd be great because it felt like the time went by and we didn't get to really get in there.
Well, we did as much as I think we could. I mean, I you know, in a way, the way this unfolded is the original idea might just take 2 or 3 and go deeper into them, but it seemed in the flow of what we were doing, it would be important to just briefly touch on each and then to come up with some examples, you know. But maybe on the next time we do this, it might not be necessary to do the introductory part and just dive directly and just suggest that if you really want to go to follow along with this in the most useful way, watch number 1 first, you know, and then we can, the first part 1 first, and then we can go take each of these in more depth.
That sounds terrific. I'd love that.
Mm-hmm. Very well. I think that's good for today. I've enjoyed sharing this with you, Elise, and I think we have a good start for deeper inquiries into this extremely important subject in these times. Remember, the bottom line is to value the entire spectrum of our human experience by valuing all the archetypes.
Absolutely.
And be free of what any culture says how you're supposed to be as a man or a woman. Right?
Yes, absolutely. That's the beautiful thing about this paradigm.
Okay, then, till next time. Thanks, Elise.
Yeah, take care. Talk soon.